Derek's laugh cracked off the old wooden walls like a bad nail shot. Linda clapped sharp, eager, like she was sealing a deal. I didn't blink. I didn't move. Then the judge looked up and asked, quiet as snowfall, "How many properties do you own, Mr. Collins?" The sound in that room changed when he said it. Chairs stopped creaking. Someone cleared a throat and thought better of it. The ceiling fan kept turning slow and tired, pushing around the smell of old varnish and paper. I counted my breath. 1, 2, 3. I'd been counting my whole life. That part was easy. Finally, Derek said again, louder this time, like volume could make it truer. "The house is mine." He stood there in his shiny gray suit, the kind that looks expensive until you touch it. Hair slicked back with too much gel phone half out of his pocket, like it might applaud him next. 31 years old and already convinced the world owed him interest. Linda smiled at him. My Linda, or what used to be. Her hands came together once more, polite, practiced. The sound landed in my chest harder than any gavel. I stayed still. If you'd told me 10 minutes earlier that silence could feel this heavy, I wouldn't have believed you. Silence has been my uniform for years. You wear it long enough, folks think it's weakness. They don't hear the math running underneath. The judge's pen hovered above his yellow pad. He didn't look at Derek. He didn't look at Linda. He looked at me. "One of the 9 properties," he said almost to himself. "I see. I'd like to take a look at it." I felt Linda's head turn fast. Derek's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. A flicker. Confusion, maybe. Or the first missed step in a dance he thought he knew by heart. "My name is Raymond Collins. Most people call me Ray. I'm 56 years old, born and raised in Peoria, Illinois. I spent 30 years estimating construction costs, warehouses, strip malls, storage units, places nobody photographs. I learned early that the men who talk the least usually carry the longest tape measures. That courtroom sits 2 blocks off the downtown square, across from the coffee shop, where I used to grab a burnt cup at dawn before bids. The wood paneling is older than Derek. I've seen judges come and go. They're men and women who've learned to listen for what isn't said. I stood in my worn boots and my old Carhartt jacket, the collar softened by time, the jacket Linda used to tease me about. "You look like you're going to work even when you're not," she'd say. I guess I was. The clerk called a short recess. The judge stood robes, whispering, and disappeared through the side door. The fan kept turning. Someone in the back row whispered my name like it was a rumor. Derek leaned toward Linda. "You see," he murmured. "Told you, he's got nothing." Nothing is a funny word. It's what people say when they don't know how to count. In the hallway, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and winter coats drying. I rested my palm against the cinder block wall and felt the cold come through. That's when Elaine Foster stepped up beside me. She didn't announce herself. She didn't need to. Elaine has a way of standing that says she's already read the room and filed it away. Dark blazer, no-nonsense shoes, haircut clean and practical. She grew up on the South Side, worked her way through law school, and never wasted a sentence. "Mr. Collins," she said quietly, eyes forward. "They filed an affidavit this morning." I nodded once. "Figures." "They swore," she continued, "that the marital home was your only asset." I exhaled through my nose, counting again. 1 lie, 2 witnesses, 3 signatures. Elaine finally turned and met my eyes. "Problem is," she said, "their math doesn't hold." I almost smiled, almost. Back in the courtroom, Derek paced like he owned the floor. Linda smoothed her skirt, jaw set. I thought about the years I'd let pass without speaking up. The holidays where I swallowed jokes, the dinners where I paid and kept quiet. I told myself it was peace. I told myself it was love. The truth was, it was habit. When the judge returned, the room rose and settled again. He flipped a page, glanced at the filings, then looked straight at me. "Mr. Collins," he said, "before we proceed, I'd like clarity. Is the Peoria residence the only property you own?" Every eye found me. I could feel Derek willing me to nod. Linda's fingers dug into her purse strap. The fan hummed. Somewhere outside, a truck backfired. I didn't answer right away. I counted. Years, paper, signatures, mistakes, regrets. And then I spoke. "Your Honor," I said, steady plain. "No." Elaine stepped forward. The room leaned in. I'd stayed silent long enough to let them believe their own numbers. Now it was time to count out loud. I learned to count before I learned to brag. My father ran a small HVAC outfit on the west side of Peoria. Nothing fancy. One truck, one ladder, a toolbox that smelled like oil in winter. He taught me that if you talk about money before it's earned, it tends to walk off. Count twice, he used to say, and say it once, if at all. By the time I was 25, I was estimating jobs for a regional contractor. Concrete pours steel frames, zoning headaches. I spent my days turning blueprints into numbers, and my nights turning numbers into sleep. Warehouses don't clap when you get them right. They just stand there and don't fall down. That suited me. My first wife, Mary, understood that kind of quiet. We met at a church fish fry, married young, and built a life that smelled like sawdust and coffee. Cancer took her before either of us learned how to grow old. After the funeral, the house echoed. I learned then that silence can be kind or cruel depending on how long you let it sit. I met Linda 3 years later. She laughed easily. She liked dinner out and warm lamps and the idea of starting fresh. We married at the courthouse, same building where Derek would later crow about my house. At the time, I thought simplicity was a blessing. When it came to money, I kept things separate. Not to hide, at least that's what I told myself, but to keep the peace. Linda had opinions about spending. I had habits about saving. We agreed to disagree and never quite agreed again. I invested the way I worked, slow, boring, and legal. A laundromat in Galesburg, steady quarters, steady folks. A row of storage units near I-74, no glamour, no drama. A small warehouse leased to a grain co-op, long contracts, short conversations. Each one sat in its own LLC set up years before I married Linda, advised by a loan officer at the credit union who liked things tidy. I never hid the work, I just didn't announce it. Derek noticed that. He was 20 when Linda and I married, smart mouth, quick grin, always sizing rooms. At Thanksgiving, he'd lean back and ask, "So Pop's still driving that rust bucket?" I'd smile and pass the gravy. At Christmas, he'd unwrap a gift I bought, solid, useful, and say, "You know they make nicer versions of these now, right?" I'd nod and count my blessings. I told myself swallowing it kept the house calm. I told myself a stepfather's job was to be patient, but patience unchecked teaches people the wrong math. Linda didn't push back. Not hard. She liked Derek's confidence. She liked that he dreamed big and spent faster than I did. When she asked about vacations, I'd say maybe next year. When she asked why I didn't use a premium card, I'd say I didn't need the miles. At night after the lights were out, I'd lie there and count. Bills paid, property steady, marriage uneven. The lawsuit woke me up. Reading their filing felt like discovering someone had been using your name to open accounts you never authorized. The language was clean, confident, wrong. They claimed the Peoria house was marital property alone. They implied there was nothing else to consider. Nothing else. Elaine didn't sugarcoat it. We sat in her office blinds, half-open, traffic humming below. "You let them believe you were broke," she said. "People tend to take that personally when they find out it's not true." "I didn't lie," I said. She nodded. "You didn't correct them either." That landed. I thought about all the times I'd chosen quiet because it was easier, about how keeping the peace had slowly trained them to underestimate me. I wasn't angry yet. I was disappointed in them, sure, but also in myself. I didn't want money to be the thing I said. Elaine folded her hands. "Money isn't the thing," she replied. "Truth is." On the drive home, prairie wind shoved the truck around. I passed the turnoff for the storage units and didn't take it. I wasn't ready yet. I needed to count something else first. Mistakes. I'd mistaken patience for protection, silence for strength. I'd counted on gratitude where entitlement had been growing interest. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than it used to, or maybe I'd finally learned how to measure it. Inside, Linda was on the phone. She lowered her voice when she saw me. "We'll talk later," she said, eyes sliding away. I stood there, keys in my hand, listening to the quiet, counting what I'd built, counting what I'd ignored. And for the first time, I wondered if playing broke had been the most expensive habit of all. The VFW Post 118 sits off a side road that smells like fried fish on Fridays and old stories the rest of the week. I've been stopping there since my estimating days, back when a cheap beer and a bad jukebox could sand the edges off a long bid cycle. You don't go there to be impressed. You go there to remember what matters. That night, I didn't plan on staying. I just needed air somewhere that wasn't the house, somewhere my thoughts could stretch out without tripping over furniture. The prairie wind shoved at the door when I went in, then died behind me. Warmth took over. Neon hummed. A couple of vets argued quietly about a Cubs lineup from 10 years ago. I ordered a light beer and took the stool near the wall. The jukebox crackled to life, Merle maybe, and I counted the scratches on the bar top while I waited for the foam to settle. That's when I heard Derek's laugh. It came from the back booth loud enough to cut through the music, the kind of laugh that expects company. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Linda's voice followed, brighter than usual, pitched up like she was trying to sound younger than she felt. I angled my shoulder and listened. Derek lifted his glass. To new beginnings, he said, and old houses that finally change hands. Linda clinked his glass. Ice chimed like loose change. You earned it, she said. My beer tasted flat. Derek kept going. He always does. Guy spent his whole life counting bolts and bricks, he said. Didn't even know what he was sitting on. I mean, 9 properties, please. If he had anything, we'd have seen it. Someone else laughed, not loud enough. My hand tightened around the bottle. The glass bit into my palm. Knuckles went white the way they do when you're trying not to move. Linda said my name then, not to defend it, just as a label. Ray never wanted more, she said. Simple guy. He liked it that way. That was the cut. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the house. It was the way 30 years of work got reduced to a punchline over cheap gin. In that room where men toasted service and loss, my silence was being cashed like a bad check. I counted to 5, then 10. I could stand up, walk back there, lay it all out. I could tell them about the laundromat that paid through recessions, the storage units that never missed rent, the warehouse that smelled like grain and stability. I could watch Derek's face fold. But I didn't. Because once you speak, you can't choose who hears you. And I needed the right room. I finished my beer slow, paid in cash. As I stood, Derek said one last thing louder than the rest. Tomorrow, he said, we're free men. I stepped back into the wind and let it hit my face. Cold cleared the noise. I drove home with the radio off, headlights carving a narrow truth through the dark. Sleep didn't come easy. It circled, kept its distance. I stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks I'd never fixed. I thought about Mary, about promises that don't expire just because you stop saying them out loud. The next morning I sat across from Elaine again. Same office, same blinds, different man. They celebrated, I told her. She didn't ask where. She didn't need to. What do you want to do, she asked. I looked at my hands. They were steady. I want them to stop laughing, I said, legally. Elaine nodded. Then we count carefully, she said, and we accept the risk. She laid it out plain. Derek had signed an affidavit swearing I owned nothing beyond the Peoria house. That statement wasn't just wrong, it was sworn. If we proved otherwise, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was misrepresentation. Maybe worse. But she added, once we open the books, everything's visible. Old filings, old signatures. If there's a gap, they'll try to pry it open. I thought about a missing form from years back. A transfer I'd filed during a snowstorm when the clerk closed early. I'd meant to follow up. I'd counted on memory. Dignity says walk away, Elaine said. Justice says speak. I took a breath, counted it, let it go. I'm done being counted out, I said. Elaine smiled just a little. Then let's do the math. Paper has a smell when it's been asleep too long. Dust and ink and the faint bite of metal clips that have held their ground for decades. I hadn't opened the safe in the basement in years, not really. I spun the dial by muscle memory the way you do with old routes home and listened to the click that meant the past was about to speak. Elaine wanted everything. Not summaries, not assurances. Originals where possible. Copies where not. We don't impress judges with confidence, she'd said. We impress them with paper. I spread folders across the dining table like a contractor laying out plans. LLC formation docs, deeds, lease agreements. Old tax returns that still carried the typeface of a different decade. I counted each stack. 1, 2, 3. I'd been careful. Careful usually pays. Until it doesn't. The gap stared back at me from a yellow checklist Elaine had given me. Transfer confirmation 1998. The warehouse interest. The one I'd rolled from my personal name into an LLC during a February storm so bad the courthouse closed at noon. I remembered the slush on my boots, the clerk's tired smile. I remembered telling myself I'd come back with the stamped copy. I never did. I drove that afternoon with the radio low, windshield wipers beating time. First stop was the credit union on Knoxville Avenue. Same brick building, same smell of carpet cleaner and coffee. A woman named Carol still worked the counter, gray hair now, glasses on a chain. She remembered my father. She remembered me. Counting again, she asked friendly. Trying to, I said. She pulled archived records, slow but thorough. We found most of what I needed, not the missing piece. Next, the warehouse. The lot sat quiet under a pale sky wind, whirring the loose metal on the loading bay. I stood there and listened to it rattle like an old man clearing his throat. This place had kept food moving when other things stopped. I'd skipped my niece's graduation to close that deal. I counted the cost then. I counted it now. At the county records office, a young clerk tapped at a keyboard and shook his head. Digital only goes back so far, he said. Older stuff's off-site. How far, I asked. He shrugged. Depends who boxed it. That night, I ate a sandwich over the sink and thought about all the times I'd chosen later. Later is a lie that charges interest. Elaine called. Any luck? Not yet. A pause. We'll keep digging, she said. But understand if they sense weakness, they'll lean on it. I know, I said. And I did. Derek leaned on anything that bent. 2 days later, I drove to a storage facility an hour out the kind with long aisles and fluorescent lights that hum like they're tired of working. A retired county worker named Bill met me there. He moved slow, but his memory was sharp. Snowstorm year, he said, squinting. Yeah, we boxed a bunch and sent it out. He disappeared between rows and came back with a cart. Cardboard boxes labeled in thick marker. I counted breaths while he searched. 1, 2, 3. He pulled a folder and set it down. This one. My name sat there in faded ink. The stamp was clean. The date was right. Relief is a quiet thing when you've lived long enough. It doesn't shout. It sits. Back at Elaine's office, we built the order. Not flashy, clear. The laundromat spoke for itself, steady income, no drama. The storage units did the same. The warehouse closed the loop. We didn't list all 9 in detail. We didn't have to. We proved the count was wrong. Still, doubt crept in at night. What if winning meant losing the last illusion I had? What if silence had been my shield and speaking would leave me bare? Elaine saw it on my face. This isn't about money, she said. It's about being named correctly. The morning of the hearing, I put on the same jacket. I counted the buttons. I left the house keys on the counter. Some things you don't take back. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Linda walked past me. She didn't stop. She didn't have to. I'd already stopped pretending. When the bailiff called us in, I felt calm, not numb, ready. I'd done the work. I had the paper. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be guessing anymore. The courtroom sounded different the second time. Same walls, same fan. But the air had weight now, like a storm deciding whether to break. Derek stood straighter than before, chin up, suit pressed. Linda sat close to him, hands folded, lips tight. They didn't look at me, not once. I didn't take it personally. People avoid mirrors when they're not ready for what they show. The judge entered, settled, and flipped through the file. Paper whispered. A cough echoed from the back row. I counted the seconds between breaths and felt my pulse slow to match them. Mr. Collins, the judge said, will continue. Derek's attorney spoke first, confident, clean. He repeated the claim. The Peoria house, the marriage, the assumption that there was nothing else worth discussing. He said it the way people say facts they've never checked. When he finished, the judge nodded and turned to Elaine. Ms. Foster. Elaine stood. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. Your Honor, she said, we'll begin with Exhibit A. She handed the clerk a folder. It slid across the desk with a soft scrape that carried farther than you'd expect. The defendant owns a laundromat in Galesburg, she said. Formed under Collins Wash LLC in 2009. Premarital. Profitable. Documented. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, just enough. Derek shifted his weight. Elaine continued. Exhibit B, storage units off Interstate 74. Collins Storage Holdings. Deed and lease agreements included. Linda's hands tightened. Her knuckles went pale. She leaned forward like she might interrupt, then thought better of it. Exhibit C, Elaine said. A warehouse interest leased to a regional grain co-op. Transfer confirmed in 1998. She paused. Let the date sit. Derek's smile finally cracked. Not all at once, just a corner. Elaine didn't list everything. She didn't need to. She set the stack down and looked at the judge. Your Honor, the sworn affidavit submitted by Mr. Derek Collins states that the Peoria residence is Mr. Raymond Collins's sole asset. The judge looked up. Is that so? Elaine nodded. It is sworn, and it is incorrect. The room leaned in. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered Derek's name like a warning. The judge turned to Derek. You signed this. Derek swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. Did you read it? Yes. And at the time you signed, the judge said evenly you were aware of these other properties. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his attorney. Linda stared straight ahead as if the wall might offer shelter. Derek began. The judge raised a hand. Careful, he said. This is the moment where counting matters. Silence fell. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that tells the truth it's about to speak. Elaine finished it. We're not here to embarrass anyone, she said. We're here because sworn statements have weight, and misrepresenting assets to the court carries consequences. The judge nodded once. Then he looked at me. Mr. Collins, he said, why didn't you disclose these earlier? I stood. The wood floor felt solid under my boots. Because I wasn't asked, I said, and because I trusted my family. That last word didn't wobble. It surprised me. The judge studied me for a long moment. Then he looked back at Derek. Next time, he said, dry as dust, learn to count before you swear. The gavel came down, not hard, enough. Motion denied, he said. Claims dismissed. It was over. Outside, the winter sun cut through the clouds like it had someplace better to be. Linda caught up to me on the steps, breath short. Ray. I turned. I'm done being easy math, I said. She stopped. I walked on. The first morning in the new condo was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. No slammed cabinets, no tension hiding in the corners. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the river moving outside like it had nowhere else to be. I stood on the small balcony with a chipped mug of black coffee steam rising into cold Illinois air and counted something different. Not assets, not losses. Breaths. The Illinois River slid past below gray and steady. I'd driven over that bridge 1,000 times without stopping. Funny how victory slows you down more than defeat ever did. I didn't move there because I had to. I moved because I chose to. The Peoria house was still mine legally, cleanly, but it no longer felt like home. Some places keep your memories hostage. Letting go isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the last smart investment you make. A week after court, I signed paperwork donating one of the smaller properties, the warehouse lease interest, to a local housing program run through a church on the South End. No press, no plaque, just a handshake from a man who looked me in the eye and said, "This'll help people sleep warmer." That was enough. Linda called 3 times before I answered. On the 4th, I picked up. Her voice sounded smaller, like the room around her had finally emptied. Ray, she said, and stopped. The silence stretched. I didn't know, she said finally, about the properties, about any of it. I leaned against the balcony rail and watched a barge crawl upstream. You knew enough, I said. You knew who you were clapping for. She breathed in sharp. I never meant. I know, I said, and I did. People rarely mean the damage they cause. That doesn't make it imaginary. There was a time I would have filled the quiet for her, smoothed it over, counted her comfort before my own. Not anymore. Linda, I said steady, you didn't want a partner. You wanted something you could count on while you counted me out. She didn't argue. That told me more than any apology could. We hung up without drama, no promises, no anger, just an ending that finally fit. Life settled after that. I kept the laundromat, still hums like clockwork. The storage units still open and close on time. The rest keep doing what they were always meant to do, stand quietly and work. Sometimes folks ask why I never told my family what I had. I tell them this: I spent my life counting materials so buildings wouldn't fall. Somewhere along the way, I forgot to count respect. When you don't, other people do it for you, and they usually get it wrong. Revenge wasn't standing in that courtroom watching Derek shrink into his chair. That was just arithmetic, necessary, final. The real revenge was this calm, this space, this choice to live counted, not guessed. If you've ever been underestimated because you stayed quiet, if someone laughed while you held your tongue, Remember, this silence can be strength, but only if you're ready to speak when it matters. If this story made you pause or reminded you of your own quiet battles, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. And if you believe stories like this still matter about dignity, patience, and standing up the right way, subscribe and stay with us. Some things are worth counting together.